Good morning. This is Kenneth and Heather with the Advancing Equity Coalition, here to give you our quick debrief of last night's Committee of the Whole meeting that was focused on academic updates. So, Heather, I'll just pass it right to you. What stood out to you last night during the conversation on academic updates?
You know, um, so a couple different things. One is that I think it's clear that it's really difficult to teach math in distance learning, especially to the younger years. We saw kind of that slide where it was like, oh, like moving around numbers. We clearly didn't get that done during distance learning, and so I think like that was one thing. The other part was that like while we did see a decrease in distance learning, I was curious about the fact that a lot of our gaps were consistent. And so, you know, the pandemic is a problem, but maybe it's not the whole problem. Um, and then I think, there were some parts of the conversation last night that were really interesting to me. Like I was like, oh, that sounds like we're going somewhere. But what were your overall thoughts?
Yeah, I think the first thing that really stood out to me was, well, actually, let me back up. The first thing that really stood out to me was the data.
Yeah.
Um, and like I said before in our earlier video, if you didn't catch it, like you can look at some of the data slides, you'll see our slide of the night. Um, you know, I laugh really to stop from crying because it is uncomfortable and it is bad. And as we mentioned in the first video, it was not really discussed. I mean, we just kind of flew by it. I feel like we're normalizing it, we're minimizing it. We say things like the pandemic is the cause of it. We say things like, this is happening in urban districts all over the country. Um, and I don't know if we actually feel ownership over it. And like that is hard for me. I don't feel like the board feels ownership over it. And they're not, I don't think the board is willing to hold themselves accountable or hold anyone accountable around the data that we saw. Is like, yep, the pandemic, yep, the racism, yep, I mean, all the things, and like saying that there are very little things in our control that we can actually do to address this problem. So I think that stood out to me. But being more nerdy, another thing that really stood out to me was in the literacy action plan, what I saw as what the district identified as, the reason for the problem, or, the problem that we're trying to solve. Sorry, the problem that we're trying to solve was the essentially just like the low literacy rates for our earliest learners, especially it looked like. Um, K2, I think, is what they're focusing on. And what really stood out to me was like the achievement gap and like the disparities that we see is the problem that we're trying to solve, but it's not the reason for the problem. Like the reason for the achievement gap is not the achievement gap. It's not something that like we directly solve in that way. What I was hoping to see in the literacy action plan was what are the specific issues that are causing us to have such low literacy rates, especially amongst our youngest learners, and why do we see these happening across racial lines? What are we doing in the system? Then like we can create a plan around like, here are the things in the system that we need to change, that we need to improve in order to address these, to actually change these low literacy rates, right? Whether that is, we have to change our evaluation system and our instruction, or we have to change our professional development, or we have to change the amount of time. And these are things that I think the district started to talk about, or the board started to talk about a little bit. But I think we keep framing the problem that we're trying to solve as the achievement gap. And like, no wonder you just throw up your hands and say, yeah, that's happening all over the district. But like, can you tell me why Minneapolis Public Schools specifically has an achievement gap or has such low literacy rates? I'm curious about that. And I feel like if we build a plan around something so big and vague, and we're not more specific around like the literacy problems that we're trying to solve, then we're going to start building the wrong conditions. We're going to start building the wrong solutions, and we're going to start making the wrong investments.
Yes, all of that was true. And I think the other thing that I noticed was that there were some moments last night where we were really honest. Um, Deputy Rollinger was talked about how when she was a fourth grade teacher and she was teaching students who did not have kindergarten literacy skills, she literally said, and I didn't know what to do. So I had to go back to the kindergarten team and ask them, what do you do to get a kiddo to learn this? And she talked about the science of reading. She used those words. She talked about some of the things that she didn't know. And what I really appreciated about her moments was admitting that, like, she didn't know what to do, how to make content relevant to a fourth grader who didn't have a kindergarten skill set. I think that's a very real problem in Minneapolis public schools that we don't give teachers real solutions for. Um, and so I really appreciated that, like the naming of what that looks like in a classroom, and her admitting that she didn't know and that she had to go seek out questions. And then how some of those, what the only thing I was a little sad was like didn't get to hear what those kindergarten teachers taught her that she brought forward to fourth grade that then worked. Like what was that thing? And so I feel like I heard some more conversations last night about what we don't know. We don't know if our current curriculum is the curriculum that's going to get us where we need to go. I heard us ask that question last night. Um, and so I was encouraged by certain moments of that honesty.
Yeah. I think there are those moments of honesty, and I wish those moments of honesty would have been a presentation of honesty, right?
Yes.
Because I think what's happening is that we're talking about these like broader, again, like the broad achievement gap, the broad like low literacy um, rates. And I think what is frustrating is like because it's so broad and we're not like narrowing it down and pinpointing what are the barriers, what are the issues that we're experiencing, and we keep it so broad, like we're just throwing shot, we're throwing shots in the dark, right? And sometimes we'll hit, right? Sometimes we'll name like teachers are struggling because they've never been taught how to teach reading. And sometimes we'll miss and we'll put again money, resources, energy into the wrong things. Now, I'm really not saying that the district and the board put like named the wrong things last night.
No.
But the problem is like I don't know what the wrong or right things are. And I think it is the responsibility of district leadership to tell the board, here are the things that we need to change. Like here's what our assessment is. And I was happy to hear last night that there is a plan to assess a number of different things specifically for K2 literacy. But like because we're still naming the like large issue as, oh, all these students and their low literacy rates, we're not actually naming like, yeah, we don't have enough time in the classroom, or we don't have enough PD, we don't have enough time for PD, we don't have enough resources, we don't have enough coaches, whatever. I don't know what the answers are. um, but I think that somebody needs to know what the problem is. So then again, the board, the district, the community can rally around like solutions to that problem, as opposed to like, well, it's up in the air and every urban district deals with it, and the pandemic made it worse, and this is just the cards we were dealt. Like that can't be a strategic way to answer the problems that we're facing as a city.
The other thing that I feel like we got to talk about is how we're naming solutions that are going to be different when they're actually not different right now. Right. So, one of the things that we heard was that our teachers need coaching, which I agree with, and they need coaching on how to use the fast data and data cycles. And we heard the word data dives in order to adjust. Right. And that was a huge part of this plan. And the reality that we are living in right now is that many of these coaches are subbing because of staffing shortages. So like I don't the district is not to blame for the fact that we are having a massive staffing shortage across the country. That's But when we continue to name coaching as the solution or the thing that's going to create a difference, and we can't do that, that's that, we like that's not realistic. That's not being real about the reality we're in.
And I think that's actually what's really, really dangerous also about the framing that the board and the district seem to be going towards for their next conversation, and that everybody should honestly be like on edge about is this conversation around the conditions. And so if we keep talking about like what are the conditions for students to learn and like for us to meet, the goals of our strategic plan or whatever it might be, like I'm really concerned that if something disrupts those conditions, it can be an excuse as to again why we couldn't teach students how to read or why we couldn't teach students to do math at grade level or whatever the issue might be. And we have to just be really, really aware of like the types of conditions that are being set so that they are things that are within the district's control and the board's control and not things that are out of the district's control. Like the board and the district cannot control how much money they're going to get from the state. The board and the district cannot control necessarily like a bunch of different things. And if anything that this pandemic has taught us is that like a lot of the conditions, a lot of things can disrupt conditions very, very easily, right? And even in ways that we didn't imagine, whether it's like now labor shortages, supply chain issues, like all these different things. And I think there's a real danger in us saying like these are the conditions that we need to set, and then saying, oh, in 3 years, well, we didn't have those conditions in place because of the pandemic and because of a shortage of funding from the state or whatever it might be. But like the more time, and all those things are going to be real and all those things could be real, but like us putting out excuses as to why something happens doesn't change the fact that Black and brown students can't read, right? Like
That's right.
great, we are less accountable now because we've put out all those excuses, but those same Black, brown, indigenous students, Asian students aren't reading.
Yep. Yep.
And like that's what's happened time and time again. We just use different language for the last 20 years.
And I think the thing that I'm really concerned about is we're still, and I said this in our shorter video, but I think it bears repeating. We are still giving information as engaging with families, and we're so far away from actually engaging with families, especially the students. I mean, the students that we desperately need to have relationships with and their families. We still don't have a true engagement plan. Um, and when I hear us talking about a literacy engagement plan as giving out more information, I worry again. Like, um, as a parent, receiving a report card in the mail that has more detailed information on it still does not tell me like what I can do, how I can partner with my teacher, my school, my principal to help my child make up that ground. Because I will tell you this, as I have the privilege of talking to parents in this city, there's not a parent in this city that does not want their child to be proficient. We want that for our children as a community. And so the fact that we still don't have a plan for bringing parents alongside of us, that's like the part where I just can't get past.
Yeah. I think, the engagement plan, yeah, obviously MPS has struggled with parent and family engagement. So like whatever this partnership needs to look like, I'm not sure how they develop that plan, but I do think information sharing is one component of family engagement, 100%. But yeah, something else that I did want to just mention before we hop off is along your theme of like moments of truth moments of truth was I heard in the conversation, I think Director Inns actually asked the question that necessitated this response was like a conversation around like structured literacy, science of reading versus whole literacy, balanced literacy. And this has been a topic of conversation in the community and also This was a question that was asked of the superintendent and the staff by the board last year. And so I was bracing for a similar response, and maybe the response changed because I think last year Superintendent Graff answered the question. This year, Dr. Fearing and Deputy Rollinger answered the question. But I thought it was really interesting and important to hear them say, like, the basis of, they have heard very clearly from the University of Minnesota that the basis of this literacy plan has to be on phonics, has to be around decoding, has to be around like the science of reading and structured reading. And I was like, whoa, okay, like that is a very, very different statement
Yep.
than we have heard when it comes to literacy. And again, we're only focusing on literacy because that was the lion's share of the information that we got last night. But I just thought that that was really interesting to hear that subtle shift. They still clearly want to name it as balanced literacy, and parts of it have to be around enjoying reading and different things like that, which I understand. But to name like, no, the basis of our plan actually has to be around the science of reading, is really interesting. And then to see subtle things, like you said, there was a board member that asked about the efficacy or the effectiveness of benchmark. There is a conversation in the evaluation slide around like, we're evaluating whether benchmark will lead to the best practice instruction or best practices of instruction and reading. And I was just like, okay, like there seems to be a little bit of a shift where before it felt like really staunch, like we know what we're doing, we're going to move forward with benchmark, and this balanced literacy approach like is just that, it's balanced literacy. There's some science of reading stuff, there's some whole literacy stuff and whatever, but to then hear like, no, the basis and the foundation of our literacy plan and our literacy instruction has to be the science of reading. And then hearing Deputy Rollinger essentially say like, most teachers don't know how to teach reading,
And
from
admitting that she taught for 14 years without knowing?
16 years. Yeah. And
16 years, yes.
like, I think that is really significant. And so it wasn't like a dominant theme, but like you said, these moments of truth, and like, can we tell the truth around what the barriers to us actually educating students of color are, and ensuring that our whole district is literate. I think that's the goal. And how do we continue to get closer to that?
Yeah, so this conversation will continue next month. We'll be talking more about conditions, and so we'll have to be watching for your sense of caution.
Yeah. What with that, I hope folks enjoy the rest of their week, whether you're going to be with family, whether you're going to be doing your own thing. I hope you enjoy it. And I appreciate you, Heather. Thank you so much for everything so far this year. And we have one more month to finish this year strong, and we will be here in 2022. Don't worry about that. But thank you, and thank you to everyone listening. Appreciate it.
Hope the gumbo is good.
Appreciate that. Talk to y'all later.
Bye.